Hello, my name is Sherry Siniger. I am the branch manager of the Onalaska Public Library, part of the La Crosse County Library System. I'd like to introduce a book talk series called I've Been Reading, and the first installment will be about DNA mysteries. This handsome fellow next to me here is my grandfather, George Kalmbach, and he also has a DNA mystery I will share with you later. The first book I'd like to talk about is called The Foundling by Paul Joseph Franzak, the true story of a kidnapping, family secret, and my search for the real me. In 1963, there was a baby born in a hospital to the Franzaks, and shortly after, the baby was stolen from the nursery. Of course, the Franzaks were despondent in searching for their child. A year later, a child was found abandoned, and it was determined that this child was the Franzak's missing child, and he was returned to the family. He grew up, he had a brother, never quite felt right in his own skin. He went on to the army, did some acting. He had a child of his own and felt he needed to find out about his own ethnicity and DNA history. It was discovered that he was not the biological child of the Franzaks. It essentially reopened the kidnapping case, and he goes on a long, winding track to find his biological family. He actually had a twin sister, and the twin sister is deceased, and he goes as far as to excavate the ground where his biological parents lived to find any material about his twin sister. The exciting thing about this book is there have been some developments since the publication of the book of who the real Paul Joseph Franzak is. So I'll leave you with that little teaser. Paul Joseph Franzak, The Foundling. The next book, it's a new title. It's called Hidden Valley Road, and it's written by Robert Kolker. It is about the Galvin family, a family in Colorado who had 12 children over the course of 20 years, and 6 of those 12 were diagnosed with schizophrenia. It's important to note that scientists, psychiatrists, psychologists, and geneticists were very interested in this family because they could trace the schizophrenia over several years. It also involves the causes of schizophrenia over the years. In the early years, it was thought that an overbearing mother was the cause of schizophrenia, and as the years go on and more children are diagnosed, it's interesting to see how the belief changes. This book is arranged in chapters, with each chapter highlighting different members of the family and how either schizophrenia affected them or how it affected the siblings, and how they grew as young children, young adults, and then adults who were eager to help the family members with schizophrenia. A very interesting read is called Hidden Valley Road: Inside the Mind of an American Family by Robert Kolker. On a little lighter note, this book is called It's All Relative: Adventures Up and Down the World's Family Tree by A.J. Jacobs. A.J. starts his own DNA quest, and he determines that we're all cousins somehow. Everybody across the world is related in some way, so he sets out to have a cousins reunion, uniting families across the globe. He is successful in part. There were reunions held in different countries, uniting families and sharing stories and sharing their ancestry. So this is an enjoyable, lighter read. It's called It's All Relative: Adventures Up and Down the World's Family Tree by A.J. Jacobs. Another interesting title that I read is called The Lost Family, and how DNA testing is upending who we are. And it is by Libby Copeland. And it delves deeper into why people are having their DNA tested. What are some of the reasons, and what kind of things can they discover? Alice takes a DNA test and finds out her very Irish father, who was an orphan, was not Irish at all, but rather a European, of European Jewish descent. So it launched a treasure hunt to find out how that could have happened. There are several companies where you can research your DNA: Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage DNA, or Family Tree DNA. You can have your medical history examined as well by some of these companies. Now, when people have their DNA done, often they have surprising results. One of them might be a non-paternity event, or NPE, where you find out that your father isn't really your father. It puts into question your relationships with your mother, her stories. It can, if you confront your mother about perhaps what could happen, it could be well received or not well received. It also brings in some ethics questions. A gentleman was tested for a kidney donation. They tested his 2 children, and one of the children, it came back that it was not his biological child. So it was determined that all they had to say was it was not a good antigen match, but it was not necessary to reveal that the child was not his biological child. So a non-paternity event is something that could happen from the DNA test. Also, questions about consent can come into play here. Can you take a DNA sample from a person who is dead? Or can you take hair samples, hair follicle samples from someone who's passed away? Often the questions of why did your parents keep the truth of your genetic identity away from you are often difficult. With the medical aspect to the DNA testing, some other ethical privacy questions come in. Are insurance companies allowed to have this information? can it risk your ability to get insurance? So those are some of the questions brought up in this book. Another group that searches for their DNA are of course, adoptees. It's grounding and validating to find out where you may have come from. David Brzezinski, a clinical psychologist, when he speaks to adopted parents about whether their adopted child will seek or look for their biological parent, he says that the percentage of that is 100%. They will most probably seek their biological parents. What about years ago, if you find out that the father you've known wasn't your father at all? Is it correct to upend someone's family structure after several decades? Another interesting question. Another group that would want to test their DNA are donor-conceived adults. And that brings into play a whole nother range of questions. When you find out, are you going to try to contact them? How are you going to try to contact them? And what will be their reaction? What if you are met with rejection? So all these questions are interesting. Another part of DNA searching might include finding an ethnicity that you weren't aware of. Perhaps one of your ancestors was of a different ethnic group and passed as a white person, or it's often interesting and challenging to find out that your ethnic background is different than you thought it was. So this is The Lost Family by Libby Copeland, another worthwhile read in my opinion. I have 2 more books that I read, and I'm just going to share them if you might enjoy them. It's by Buzzy Jackson, called Shaking the Family Tree, Blue Bloods, Black Sheep, and Other Obsessions of an Accidental Genealogist. And The Stranger in My Genes, Genes, by Belle Griffith. And 2 more worthy reads if you're interested in DNA mysteries. Well, my DNA mystery with this guy over here, he passed when I was 7 years old. And for the entirety of my 7 years that I knew him, he told me that he was of Native American heritage. I fell for it. After he passed, I wrote a story, a report about my grandfather, the Native American, and I guess it was quite interesting when my mom and dad went for a conference and the teacher showed them a whole report I had written about my Grandpa George and his Native American history and genealogy. Turns out he was really German. I will include a short bibliography of the books I've shared today, and I'd like to thank Janie for designing my little logo. I look forward to sharing more book talks with you in the future, and I'm just going to keep on reading. Thank you.